and 57 and 58? It's a good question, right? Because at least theoretically you could argue things were objectively worse in the 50s, before civil rights laws, before the Great Society programs, before the official launching of the war on poverty, which wasn't much of a war, but at least in theory, right? In theory, we were making progress by 65 and 67 and 68, much more so than in prior decades, and yet the rebellions came right at the moment things were getting better. It seems counterintuitive, except it's not, right? Both sociologists and social psychologists weighed in on that at the time, and they came up with a theory which has been more or less accepted as common knowledge now, which is this notion of rising expectations theory, right? And when you all of a sudden have your expectations driven upward relative to where they had been, and then you find those expectations not quite fulfilled the way you had hoped, that's when you actually are more likely to explode, because they made you a promise. Before, they weren't even promising you anything. So you're just trying to stay alive. You didn't have time for the revolution, didn't have time for the rebellion, didn't have time to burn stuff, and you knew that if you did, they would just shoot you, right? But by 65, 67, 68, all these folks are telling you, it's going to get better. We promise, we got all these programs. And then you're looking around and you're like, yeah, but it hasn't. And maybe there's an act of police brutality has happened here in 65 in Watts, and everything explodes, right? Or has happened in so many places in 67. And folks can't figure it out. It's rising expectations. If I start to make you promises and I don't follow through, that's when you explode. Okay, now, if that's true for the marginalized, right? If marginalized people suddenly explode because you started making them promises like a week ago or a month ago or a year ago and you didn't follow through, and now they can't handle the disconnect between the aspiration and the achievement, what do you think happens to people who have been promised their whole lives? Not like some recent promise, right, that followed years of oppression, but like from birth, we're told this is how it will go for you. And then after 50 years of that promise, you suddenly figure out the whole thing was bullshit, right? Of course, that explosion is going to be even greater, right? And that's what we see right now, is we see this collective meltdown, the result of the trauma of a system of inequality, even for those on the top of that system. So we have to understand this interest convergence and understand that this work that we're doing, that we're trying to do, that I know many of you are engaged in various ways in your professional and personal lives, this is not something we do for the other, right? This is not charity work, right? This is not something that white folks should get into to help, quote unquote, the oppressed. I think the oppressed will, as they always do in every society, ultimately be the source of their own liberation. The question is, who is going to liberate white folks from the mental and emotional straitjackets that we have placed ourselves in for 400 years? That is not black and brown folks' job to do. That is our job to do. And if we understand that fighting racism and white supremacy is not charity work, it's not altruism, it's not that, it's self-help. That thing we like to preach to other people and then not do for ourselves. It is self-care. It is